right. Well, thank you all for coming. Alex and I have nothing scripted or planned. We just talked a few minutes ago about how we're going to do this. And what we decided is we're going to take 5-ish minutes each to just present our view on this question, free will, do we have it? And Alex is going to go first. So,
Sure. Well, in a way, it's all scripted, isn't it? Just not by us.
oh, that's what we're debating. That's right.
I'm somebody who doesn't believe in free will on like a philosophical level, right? Like everybody has the experience of choice. Everyone knows what it's like to be faced with two options and feel as though you can sort of deliberate and decide, am I going to pick up this bottle or am I going to pick up this bottle? And then you make a choice. When we start paying attention to what's actually going on when we make such a decision, but also start thinking rationally about what could be behind such decision-making making faculties, it's really difficult to imagine that there is any room to say that we ourselves are the ultimate author of those actions. And there are a few ways that we can think about this. One is to start looking at the motivation of actions and thoughts and behaviors. Right? Now, of any event, anything that occurs, any movement of the arm, any tree falling to the ground, anything like this, that event will either be determined by something or it will not be determined by something. Those are, by the way, your only two options. The law of the excluded middle says that something is either true or false in a logical propositional sense. There's no in between. An event is either determined by something or it's not. If an event is not determined by anything, it happens with no determinate cause. It just happens. That is the definition of randomness. Random events, by definition, you are not in control of. So if an event happens with no determinate cause, you're not in control. Let's take some kind of mental event, like a thought that appears in your mind, or a movement of the body, or the decision that you make to focus on what I'm saying instead of allowing your mind to drift. That kind of mental event is something which is either determined or it's not. If it's not determined by anything, it's random and you're not in control. If it is determined, the question is this: what's it determined by? Well, maybe it's determined by something internal to me. Maybe it's determined by some of my brain activity, neurons firing. Okay. But then you just ask the same question again of that activity, those neurons firing. That is either determined or it's not. And again, it's either random, you're not in control, or it's determined by something. Okay, by what? Well, if it's determined by something inside of me, you ask the same question, and again, and again, and again. And you push this chain of causation either until it terminates in randomness, which you're not in control of, or until the chain of causation ultimately extends outside of yourself. And if the ultimate cause of a chain of events which led to me picking up this bottle like began or exists outside of my own self, then I can't be said to be the ultimate author of that action. So just to clarify, by the way, a lot of people put against each other the idea of free will and the idea of determinism. Determinism broadly is the idea that every single thing is determined by prior events. So since the Big Bang, everything that was going to happen, every position that you're all sat in, all of the chairs being laid here, it was all sort of destined, for want of a better word, to happen since the beginning of the universe through cause and effect. And it's usually thought that there's determinism and there's free will. But you don't have to be a determinist to not believe in free will. Because in the face of determinism, some interpretations of quantum mechanics, for example, say, no, there's randomness, there's probability built into the fundamentals of reality. Okay, sure, so determinism would be false then, fine. Determinism isn't true. The question I'm interested in is, are you in control? Are you in control of any of the mechanisms which ultimately govern our behaviors? And I think that the answer is no. There are more ways to cash this out too. That timer is not ticking, so I have no idea how long I've been speaking, and I have a tendency to go over. It's not my fault. I can't help it. But I think I'll just pass it on for now.
Cool. So great. Thanks. This gets good material on the table to start with. So a teacher on a Tuesday announces to her class that there will be a pop quiz one day this week. And one of the students thinks to himself, well, a pop quiz is a quiz that pops up on a day you don't see coming. And you don't know it's coming. So he reasons it's Tuesday. Well, the pop quiz can't be on Friday, because if Wednesday and Thursday pass, and I know that, then I'll know the quiz is on Friday, which means it can't be a pop quiz. It can't be on Thursday, because if I know it can't be on Friday, then if Wednesday passes, I'll know that it's going to be on Thursday, ergo not a pop quiz. If it's not on Thursday and not on Friday, then it can't be a pop quiz, because then I know today that it's going to be tomorrow on Wednesday. So there can't be a pop quiz. Next day, there's a pop quiz. What went wrong? Well, what went wrong is that the student is operating with a false view of the thing he's thinking about, a pop quiz, and he's doing mental machinations rather than looking at reality. If we want to understand certain things, especially free will, we can't just do mental machinations in our head. We have to look and see, and we have to trust perceptual reality over our mental machinations. So another way that you can think about this is, I'm going to walk across the stage. Now, did I walk across the stage? Okay, hold that thought, because it's actually impossible that I walked across the stage. Why is it impossible that I walked across the stage? Well, you may have heard of Zeno's paradox. It's impossible because in order to walk across the stage, I first have to walk half the distance. But before I can walk half the distance, I have to walk half that distance. And before I walk half that distance, I have to walk half that distance, and so on. Ultimately, what this means is I literally can't move. What's right here? The theory that in order to walk across the stage, I first have to walk half the distance, then half the distance, then half the distance, which sounds perfectly reasonable. Or is it true that I can walk across the stage? It's just true that I can walk across the stage. So what we have to do if we want to think clearly about things is we have to rely on perceptual reality as our starting point. We cannot rely on mind games or thought experiments. They can be really useful. I'm not going to diss thought experiments. They can be really, really useful, but they don't do the heavy lifting for us if we remove them from perceptual reality. Now, in Alex's understanding of, or his view of what free will is, we're working with a really complicated package deal, and that is in the concept determined. Determined seems to mean two things at once, but these two things are different. All right. It is true that everything that happens is caused. That's true. But it is not true that everything that happens is necessitated by prior events. And if you have necessitated and caused packaged together under the concept determinism, you have what Ayn called a package deal. Free will is not difficult to see that you have once you understand what it is. If I say to a 4-year-old, do you believe in Aristotle's law of non-contradiction? He will not know what I'm talking about. But if I say to him, can your truck simultaneously be a truck and an ocean at the same time? Can it be a truck and a non-truck at the same time? He will say no. In other words, he understands the point, he just doesn't know the name of it. What we need is to understand the point first before we start playing with the word free will or the concept free will, because it's been very misconstrued. So let me ask you this. If you look inside your mind and I ask you, can you exert mental effort? Can you introspectively see whether you're able to regulate the amount of effort you make with your mind? Can you ramp it up and ramp it down? Can you turn it off and back on? I think you'll see that you can. You can observe yourself doing that. This is introspectively self-evident. Prior to naming it, prior to naming the law of non-contradiction, the child can see that the fact it's going to name is true. If I say to you, just to demonstrate how valid your introspection is, because we don't want to doubt introspection, introspection is as valid as extrospection. I look out, I see a truck coming, speeding down the road. I don't want to doubt that perception. Well, don't doubt your introspection either. I'll turn one of Sam Harris's examples on its head here. Pick a city, any city. All right. Let's say you picked Tampa, and I say, no, you didn't. You picked Orlando. Who's right? And how do we know who's right? Now, you could lie about what you picked. You could lie about your introspection, but set that aside. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking you genuinely picked Tampa, and I tell you, no, you didn't. You picked Orlando. Well, you'd say you have no business telling me whether I can see in my mind which city I picked. And I think you'll see the same thing is true of your capacity to observe introspectively that you do in fact choose to activate your mind or not, which means basically to go by reason or not. Now, there are degrees of not going by reason. You can drift, you can even turn reason against itself, you can evade, you can use your reasoning mind not to know, right? But if you're using reason correctly, you're trying to understand. And that's what free will is. It's this capacity to do that. And the last point I want to make, just to sort of paint the broad picture of the way that I think about this, is that our rational faculty and our emotional faculty coexist. They're both real. They're both in here. They have different jobs. Our rational faculty is our means of observing reality, conceptualizing what we observe, forming concepts, forming propositions, forming generalizations and principles. That's what we humans do. That's why we can do all this weird stuff that we do that the other primates and animals can't do, because we have reason. We also have an emotional faculty, which is our psychological means of experiencing our values, whether positive or negative. And our values arise from our thinking or non-thinking about the experiences that we have. And that's your emotions form over time because your values form over time. As you're a kid, you like trucks, you get a new truck, you like it. Why? Because you value the truck. But you had to do thinking about what the truck is, how you can use the truck, et cetera, before you could have any affinity for the truck, right? Your values arise from your thinking or non-thinking. So these two things coexist, reason and emotion. Now, portions of these two things, Alex is going to talk, I think, today about desires or wants, because they're a really important part of this discussion. And they're real. Our desires, our wants are real. But they coexist with reason and the corollary of reason. And this is a really important point. Reason and free will are essentially the same faculty. Reason is our ability. It's this capacity that we have to think. And free will is the capacity to activate reason or not, to use our mind or not. Free will comes with reason. They come together. If you didn't have free will, you couldn't activate your rational faculty. You wouldn't have a rational faculty. If you can't use it, you don't have it. They're the same faculty looked at from two different perspectives. One is the faculty that enables you to think, and the other is the capacity to activate that faculty. If you understand that this is what free will is, it's just the capacity to activate your rational faculty. It is not an either or. Either you're acting on your wants and desires, or you're acting on choice. You can act on both at the same time. This is not either or, it's both and. And the way that it works as a both and is if you want to act in a certain way, and you might then say, well, whichever want I have is more powerful, that's the thing I'm going to do. If I really want to go to the gym, then that's one thing. But if I want to do something else more, then I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm going to do this other thing. That's true, but it's kind of trivially true. We all know that. The question is, can you bring in, by an act of will, the option of thinking about your values? So then rather than acting on whichever one happens to be strongest at the moment, you step back and say, I'm going to project my thinking to encompass all the values that I might act on right now, think through them, and make the decision on which one makes most sense to me. That's what reason enables us to do in conjunction with our emotional faculty. So I see these things as coexisting, preferably in harmony. We can let them become antagonistic to each other, but we can also harmonize them if we understand what they are and don't mistake free will for being the misunderstood pop quiz, and don't mistake your mental machinations, your ability to go, but something had to make you want, but something had to make you want, but something had to make you want, so that it's wants or turtles all the way down. There's got to be a primary cause. And the primary cause is you. You're not determined to act in a certain way. When you choose, the choice is caused, but it's caused by you. It's not necessitated by prior factors, and it's not determined by prior factors outside of your control. It is caused, so it's not causeless, but it's caused by you, the agent who has that capacity.
Lots to unpack there. I think a really important point that Craig raises at the beginning is that a lot of the time we seem to have sort of philosophical arguments against things which are just palpably true, right? Like you can make an argument that there's no free will, but we just feel that we have it, right? Zeno's paradox is kind of a good example, I think. I love Zeno's paradoxes. I think they're great fun. But of course, in the face of a paradox like Zeno's, most philosophers and mathematicians and scientists just come up with solutions. So how is it that I can clap my hands together if I have to first half the distance, then half it again, then half it again? Well, there are a few ways to think about this. Firstly, I don't think Zeno's paradox properly incorporates time, because it's not just that you're dividing space, you're also moving through time as you do so. And of course, a few hundred years ago, mathematicians figured out a rather nifty way to sum infinite series that were sort of getting smaller and smaller as you go along. And so mathematicians kind of don't have, they actually look at me like I'm a bit silly when I mention Zeno's paradox to them, because they go, well, we've got a solution. Physicists often like to suggest that space is discrete. In other words, it's not infinitely divisible. Some people here might have heard of what's known as the Planck length, which is thought by many to be the smallest possible distance in physics. I think that that's actually a concept about the smallest physical distance that can be meaningfully measured. There might actually be metaphysically a smaller distance, but whatever the case, some physicists say, okay, well, if you can divide space infinitely, I can't clap my hands, but I can clap my hands, therefore you can't divide space infinitely. And physicists, a lot of physicists do have this sort of atomic view of the nature of reality at its foundation, that it's discrete. And that kind of solves the problem. So it's an interesting paradox, but there are simply solutions to this. But I understand the point that's being made, which is that you have an argument which says you shouldn't be able to feel something, but you do. Sometimes our reason is leading us astray there, but sometimes it's not. For example, if I were to grab you by the hands and swing you around in a circle, and spin and spin and spin, you would feel yourself being pulled backwards away from me, right? You ever been in a circumstance like that on something that's spinning? Or if you're driving in a car and you suddenly turn, you feel yourself get shoved to the side. This is the centrifugal force, which of course any physicist here will know doesn't exist. It's an illusion that you feel based on other forces. You're feeling the tension of my arms and your velocity sideways, which constantly changes as you're moving along. Similarly, if you imagine a car sort of going along and you're sat here in the car, when the car turns, you keep going forwards, which is why when the car turns, you feel yourself move to the side of the car. But all that's happening is the car is moving and you're moving in the same direction until the car pulls you with it. So this centrifugal force doesn't exist. So I could swing you around in circles and you could say, I felt the force pulling me backwards, the centrifugal force. And I could say, no, you didn't. And who's right? Well, in this case, I'd be right, not you, because you are feeling something which is illusory, which is the centrifugal force. So, at the very least, we can't say that because something feels like it's true, we know it's true. Introspection isn't enough to get us that far. But we also can't fully trust, some simple thought experiments tell us that something is impossible. So I think we've both got our work ahead of us here. And I do think that the most plausible way to get around this is to just look introspectively, to just Try to pay attention to what's going on in your mind when you make some kind of choice. So Craig just asked you all to think of a city. I suppose that you did. And he said it's turning Sam Harris's example on its head, because the reason Sam Harris brings up this example is to say, did you choose which city you were going to, was going to arise in your mind? Maybe you kind of feel like you did. You thought, yeah, well, I thought to myself, I went on holiday in Paris last year, so, I'll choose Paris. If you didn't choose for that thought to occur to you, you didn't choose that occurred instead of thinking, oh, but the year before that, I went to somewhere in Florida. You went to Miami. You didn't choose which of those occurred to you. One of them just did. Maybe they both occurred to you. Maybe you thought, well, there's Miami and there's Paris. Which one am I going to choose? Well, and you're deliberating, right? But if you pay close attention to what's going on when you're deliberating between options, it's not so much that you actually make a proactive choice, it's that you just find out which one presents itself to you. Reason is really important here, right? I think that one of the things that objectivists confuse in their idea about free will is this so-called description of like choosing to activate reason, choosing to like use it, and the results of reason. I often hear people say that reason requires free will, that they're sort of like the same thing, because reason means that you have options available to you and you have to sort of look at the premises and, choose to use your reason to see if the conclusion follows. But that's not how reason works at all. If I present an argument to you, premise 1, all men are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man. Conclusion, therefore. None of you choose what conclusion comes to your mind. If I say that it follows from those premises that Socrates is mortal, you can't go, okay, let me think for a second, let me decide whether I think that's true or not. If I say that 2 + 2 = 4, which is the most foundational form of reason, which is to say tautology, you don't get to choose whether you're convinced by it. You just are. Now, some people might not be convinced by it, but they also don't get to choose that. People might go, you might be like, well, I don't know what those words mean, or what about different mathematical systems? Sure, but either way, you're not choosing. So let's say, for example, and now, Craig said that you are the author of the action. It's that actions are caused, it's just that they're caused by you. Okay. Why did you do that thing? Let's say that, okay, you have caused that thing to occur. I could say, look, a tree has caused one of its leaves to fall. You ask, well, what made the tree drop the leaf? And there'll be some factor. It'll be the wind, it'll be its genetics, it'll be, whatever, that caused the leaf to fall. The same question applies to human beings. Sure, you caused this action. It's me who caused this glass to raise right now. That something caused me to cause it. Because again, remember, you could say, no, it's just that you caused it. There's no further question. I say, okay, so what caused me to cause it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. In that case, I'm sort of a machine of randomness. Things just occur, like I am just this self that just randomly does things. And there are no determinate factors. No, I'm thirsty. And I'm talking, so I want to pick up the glass, but I also don't want to pick up the glass because I want to carry on talking. Well, is my desire to pick up the glass or my desire to keep stronger talking? Well, right now, you know the answer to that question. You know for a fact that my desire to keep talking in this instance is stronger than my desire to drink this water, because if it weren't, I'd do the other thing. If my desire to drink the water were stronger, I'd pick it up and drink it. We are ultimately governed by desire. In order to consciously act, there needs to be a way that you want the world to be that it's currently not. That's why we act. If I move this from here to here, it's because before that, there was a way I wanted the world to be where the glass was there, which it currently isn't. Right? That is what motivates actions. Now, in any situation where you act, you're going to be governed by this desire to act. You only ever do anything in the world consciously because you want to, or because you're forced to. Those are the two options, right? Like, if you want to pick up this glass, it's either because I want to pick up the glass and so I do it, or because Craig grabs my arm and makes me do it, right? In the latter case, I'm obviously not in control. So what about the situation where I just want to pick up the glass? That's why I did it. Okay. The next question is whether or not you're in control of your wants. I think quite trivially, you're not in control of your desires. And I'm glad to hear that Craig agrees with this line of thinking, right? You're not in control of your desires. And if your actions are motivated by your desires, then you're not in control of your actions either. Now, some people will say, no, but I'm not always governed by my wants. Sometimes I do things I don't want to do. I go to the gym, even though I don't want to go to the gym. Okay, but there is something you want. If all that the gym brought you, the only thing that it brought you was suffering and misery, and you don't even get like the benefits from going through suffering, you don't even get the character development, just the suffering, you wouldn't go to the gym. You want to be healthy, which is why you go to the gym. But you're kind of feeling a bit sort of lazy today, so you don't want to go to the gym. So you want to go to the gym, but you don't want to go to the gym. But what's actually going on there is you've got the desire to be healthy and the desire to sit at home and be comfortable. Which of those desires is stronger today? Do you get to choose which of those is stronger? No, one of them just is. For example, all of you here, given the fact that you're still sat down, mean that you desire to be sat in this chair right now more than you desire to be in the gym right now, right? All I want you to do, just to test this thesis, is just to choose to desire to be in the gym more. To the extent that you actually get up and go to the gym. Because if you desired it enough, you just get up and go to the gym. The door's right there. You could do it. If you really strongly desire to go to the gym, you could get up and do it. I'm not saying choose to go to the gym. I'm saying choose to desire to go to the gym. Choose to want it right now, more than you want to sit here. I know that nobody's succeeded because nobody's getting up and going to the gym. That was somebody coming in, by the way, not leaving at the back. And so you are ultimately governed by your desires. Now, there are all kinds of complex desires, and this is a very simple example. Most of the time, there's many more factors involved, but it is your desires which ultimately govern your actions. And if you're not in control of your desires, then you're not in control of your actions. Reason as well itself is the process of becoming convinced by something. Reason is the process of deriving conclusions from premises. You don't choose to do that. You just do. You know what I mean? Like if there is a syllogistic, reasonable argument, if I'm talking to you, I'm trying to convince you of something and I use reason, what do people say? Finally, the penny dropped. As if it's like outside of your control, as if suddenly, oh, yeah. You didn't have like an hour-long conversation with me going, no, I'm not convinced. No, I'm not convinced. Actually, you know what? Fine, I choose. Sure, I'm convinced by what you're saying. You don't just choose to be convinced. You just get convinced. It's outside of your control. So reason itself is anathema to the concept of free will. Much far from it being sort of required to consider them as a package. So on my understanding, the objectivist position here is that the decision that you make is the decision to sort of switch on this reason. But the few questions I have is firstly, what causes that decision to switch it on or not? So you could choose to pay attention and use your reasoning faculty to listen to what I'm saying, or you could choose to, be away with the fairies and think, oh, that's quite nice. What is that? Some kind of flowery pattern on the ceiling. You could choose to do either of those things. What governs which one you do? Oh, maybe you're getting a little bit bored. I've been talking for a little bit. Okay, but you didn't choose to be bored. Maybe you think, well, actually, no, while I'm here, I really want to pay attention to the ceiling. You didn't choose that desire. You didn't choose that one. None of these things are ultimately in your control. So the very act of turning on this reason or activating this reason or however you want to cash it out is also outside of your control. And even if it weren't, even if I just granted that, yeah, sure, okay, you have a free choice to use reason, to turn it on, to pay attention. Now we're using reason. It gets you nowhere. Because you've chosen to now like activate your reasoning faculty and use reason, but you don't get to choose what reason convinces you of. It just does or it doesn't. So even if I grant that you can choose to turn on your reasoning faculty and begin to use it, that gets you nowhere. Because once you start using that reasoning faculty, you'll realize that you are beholden to it and not the other way around, if that makes sense.
All right. Thank you. That's a lot to work with, but it's really good information and material. So welcome to a rich discussion, folks. This is great because all of Alex's points are the things that we wrestle with when we're thinking about this stuff deeply. So I want to hit on the ones that I can remember. There were enough I needed to take some notes. That's why I took my phone out. Free will is your capacity not to choose content. It is not your capacity to choose which city is going to come up from your subconscious or which movie is going to come up from your subconscious. That's content. It also is packaging together your mind, your conscious mind, which has volitional control, and your subconscious, which is a storage database, in effect, that does not have volitional control. There's a whole relationship between how they work, but they're different things. Your conscious mind is the thing, is your awareness, and your subconscious is, if I say Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, comes up, and you didn't bid it, it just came up. So these are different things, and free will is not your choice of content, it's your choice of method. You get to choose whether you're going to go by reason or default to whatever is going to take over if you don't choose reason. That's usually emotions or social pressure or something to that effect. But it's not your mind, it's going to be something else. So on the method content thing, it's just important to understand that free will does not give you the choice of content. It's only the choice of method. So for instance, if you've got two desires and if you don't use reason, you're just going to automatically act on the stronger one, which is what would happen if you didn't use reason, whatever one is stronger right now. If you chose to think and evaluate these, let's say you have a desire to go out to a rave with your friends tonight, but you have a competing desire to work on a business plan that you're putting together that you need to have wrapped up by the end of the week. Two desires. The rave might feel stronger if you're like, wow, it would be so much fun dancing and whatnot. But if you choose to think about your values, to step back, to take a broad contextual view of your life, which is what reason and free will enable you to do, then you might realize that the one that felt stronger is not actually the stronger value. Then working on the business plan becomes stronger. And yes, you will act on your stronger value, but your stronger desire, but that changed. Why? What was the changing factor? You chose to think. That's how these things harmonize. So that's one thing there. On the syllogism and the fact that if I say, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore, boom, your mind answers that. Well, that's true. That's the same example I gave about a 4-year-old. If I say, can your truck simultaneously be a truck and a non-truck? And he's going to go, well, of course not. This is because the axioms of identity and non-contradiction and even causality, the fact that entities act in accordance with their identities, are axiomatic. These are perceptual level truths that we can see the data for. A truck can't be a non-truck. You can see the data before you know the name of the thing. The name is an abstraction, and that's advanced. But the fact that a thing can't be A and non-A at the same time in the same respect is available to all of us immediately. Your mind will not let you get away with that unless you actively evade, which you can do. But that's why you get the automatic answer that Alex gave. And it's true that happens. If you're thinking inductively, it doesn't work so smoothly. Inductive is, the method of generalizing from particular concretes. That's a whole, that's what our main thinking consists of, by the way, is inducing, not deducing. Alex says that you can only act on one of two ways, either because you want to or because you're forced to. This literally, and I know this isn't his intent, but this literally kicks reason out of the picture. If you can only act on your emotion, on what you want, then reason has no place in any of this. You're just going to do what you want, and that's the end of the story. You're just acting on emotion. In other words, we're all emotionalists. But the interesting thing about this, that means that Alex is not bringing to bear here a rational argument. He's just emoting. Now, that seems wrong, doesn't it? Because obviously Alex is not just emoting. He's attempting to put rational arguments on the table, and we can see that he's trying to do that. And this points to the fact that to argue against free will, which involves arguing against reason, in my view, is to reaffirm the fact that you have free will. In order for Alex to make arguments here, he has to activate his mind. He's got to say, Craig made this point. How am I going to get them to not do this? And in order to ask those kinds of questions, he has to bring forth his full awareness of the situation. He's not choosing content with free will. That's, as I said, that's not the choice. But he has to choose to activate his mind. If he doesn't, then he can't do this thing, and he would default strictly to his emotions or his desires, but he's not doing that, which means that he's really contradicting himself in the argument that he's making, because he's using free will to deny the existence of free will. I know this is not intentional, but that's what's going on. So this is what Aristotle referred to as reaffirmation through denial, and it's a very it's a very revealing thing. It also commits what Ayn Rand called the fallacy of concept stealing, because he's using all of these concepts, reason and logic and emotion, literally every concept he's using, and these concepts could not exist if we couldn't choose to group things together and come up with categories and make definitions and use them. This is what the human rational faculty enables us to do. This is what makes us the freaks of nature, in effect, in this beautiful way, is that we can do this. But the whole thing happens by activating your mind. Reason does not operate automatically. You can turn it off entirely. You can drift and not use it fully, or you can choose full awareness. We know that we can do this because we can see it introspectively, just as you can see me walk across the stage, and just as a student can see the pop quiz arrive on his desk. One last thing, I want to give your last question. What causes the choice? Alex, he wants a cause apart from the choosing agent to cause the choice. And this is understandable because we've all been taught the false theory of causation, which is what is called event causation. It's that everything that happens is caused by a prior event. But that's just not true. Everything that happens is caused by entities. Actions are actions of entities. Entities act in accordance with their identity. If I throw a rock at a window, the rock has a certain effect because of the nature of the entities and their interaction. If I throw a cotton ball at a window, a different thing happens. Why? The event is the same, something hitting the window. The entities are different. Actions are actions of entities. Entities act in accordance with their identity. That's the law of causality. Not everything that happens was caused by a prior event. Human beings are such that we have a rational faculty, the capacity to form concepts, use logic, etc. That capacity, one of its natures is that it operates by choice. There's nothing random or weird about human beings having a capacity that other things don't have. Plants have capacities that rocks don't have. We don't look at rocks and say, well, that's the only way things can be. And you see a plant and you go, it's impossible. We can't have that. And you shouldn't look at human beings and say, well, these things are weird. They not only can locomote like other animals, but they can also move their minds by choice. No, we can't have that. Other animals can't do it. We are sui generis. We're unique. We're the one thing that we know of so far that has this weird capacity to choose to think or not to think. We know it because it's introspectively true. And so the choice is caused by us. We are the entity that makes the choice. We are the entity that acts in that way. So it's not causeless, but it is not necessitated by outside forces or by prior events. You've got to unpack that package deal of determinism, throwing all of those things together. They don't all belong together. And if you put them all together, you will get confused about what's actually happening. And you'll feel like you can't make a choice, which is just like feeling like you can't walk across the stage.
Obviously, there's a lot there. And in fact, it might be helpful to drill down into one or two things here, because otherwise we're responding to three things at once. But maybe I'll do all three and we'll see which one you feel like taking. You might have all just heard me, ladies and gentlemen, if you were paying attention, describe the process of reason as something which is outside of our control. That is to say, reason is something which compels you and not the other way around. Be it deductive or inductive reasoning, be you reasoning correctly or incorrectly, the fact of the matter is you don't get to decide whether you are compelled by reason. If I make an argument and it convinces you, then it just convinces you. You can't say, you know what, that's really convincing, I'm sold, but I'm just going to choose not to believe it anyway. If you're convinced, you're convinced. Craig just made an argument which said, well, Alex says that there are only actions that you want to do or that you're forced to do. And since reason is something that you're not forced to do, it must be something you want to do and therefore all emotive. And so there, I'm not making a reasonable argument, I'm just emoting. I just said that reasoning is something which compels you. The reasoning process is something which makes you think a particular way, which makes you compelled to believe a particular conclusion, which means that reason does not fall into the want category of action. As you either do something because you want to or because you're forced to, reason falls into the latter category. When you reason something, it's because you have to, because that's what reason is. Reason is something which guarantees a conclusion from premises, psychologically speaking. I think that's important to note. So I don't think that I'm just well, it's complicated, but on this particular dichotomy, right? You either want to or because you're forced to. Well, pay attention to the next time you're convinced of an argument and think which of those it more naturally falls into. Did you want to be convinced by a conclusion? Or did you just get convinced outside of your control? So I think that's important to note there. I don't think that free will requires reason. I think that reason provides almost a counterexample to free will, and I certainly don't think that this argument entails that reason is just emoting, although it might well be emoting, not for this reason. Another important thing to say is that Craig said, you want to go to a rave, but you also have some business that you want to work on, and the desire for the rave is stronger. Remember that Craig makes a perfectly reasonable observation that introspection is trustworthy. Desire is something which you can only know through introspection. If you think you desire something more, that is just to desire it more. It's like if you think one thing is more painful than another thing. If I put my hand on a stove and then another stove and I say, I think this one's more painful, that just means it is more painful to me. I can't think that this one's more painful, but actually this one's more painful. Maybe like in the long run or something, but I mean in that moment. Pain is just a subjectively defined experience, and so is desire. So Craig said, okay, well, I desire to go to the rave more. I've got this business thing, but the desire to go to the rave is stronger. But then, through some mysterious faculty that apparently just kind of happens somehow, I choose to activate this thing called reason, and then I become convinced, somehow also freely, that my values are really important, and suddenly my desire for staying at home is stronger than my desire to go to the rave. Well, yeah, that's in so many words what I'm saying happens. Your desire to go to the rave is stronger, and then you think about it for a moment, and something occurs to you, and you think, well, actually, if I should think about this for a moment, and again, this just occurs to you, this just happens. You think, but if I stay at home and I work on my business, then I'm going to have a successful business, and that's the life that I really want. And suddenly that desire that you've just realized just overwhelms the desire to go to the rave. And so you stay at home and do the business. Then imagine, you get a phone call and somebody says, hey, by the way, that business partner that you really want to work with, he's going to be at the rave and he's going to be in a good mood and you might be able to have a chat with him. You might think to yourself, okay, I'm going to use my reasoning here, reason my way into what I should do. That's not what happens. You just think to yourself, gosh, well, my desire for this is stronger, but now considering this factor, my desire for that's stronger, but now considering this factor, my desire for that is stronger. And your desires are just governing your wants. The important thing, your desires are just governing what you end up doing. The important thing is, do you choose what occurs to you? Do you choose to activate reason, as Craig puts it? Well, maybe you do. I don't deny that people make choices. I just think that they're not in control of those choices. I don't think you get to make that decision. Like, you're all paying attention right now, and I could tell you to choose to stop paying attention. And maybe you'd be able to do it. Only because you want to. And why do you want to? Well, to prove a point, because I've just asked you to prove that you can do it. Okay, well, now I want to do it. So, okay, I'm going to ignore you and look over here. There is a determinate factor that causes you to do that or to not. I think that is of crucial importance. What is the last thing you said? What was the third note you made?
You're asking a guy who can't remember any of the things he said. I'm not sure what.
Oh, the agent causation. It was agent causation.
Agent causation.
And then an agent causation. Okay, so yeah, I understand there are these competing visions of what causes something, and some people like to suppose that events can just be caused by agents. This process is entirely mysterious to me. When someone says, "Oh, okay, well, you chose to lift up that glass," I say, "Well, what caused me to lift up the glass?" And it's almost like that's just an illegitimate question, because the answer isn't nothing. The answer isn't no, there was no cause, because that's random. The answer is that that's just sort of somehow an incoherent question. It's like if I said, well, why did the tree fall off? Why did the leaf fall off the tree? Someone says, oh, well, the tree sort of dropped the leaf. It was the tree that caused the leaf to fall. And I said, well, yeah, but what caused the tree to drop the leaf? And you were just like, no, it's just that the tree did it. Yeah, no, I know the tree did it. Obviously, the tree caused the leaf to fall off. There was nothing else. Maybe there was the wind or something. But if it's the wind, what caused the wind to blow into the leaf? Nothing. No, it just did it. Yeah, but what caused it to do it? If the answer is nothing, then it happened randomly. And it's certainly not something that you're in control of. So this idea that like you can just do away with the question by saying that, yeah, all events in the universe either have some determinate cause or they don't, except those events which occur in your brain, which by the way, if you're a materialist, as if you don't believe in God or the soul, and you believe that all that the mind is just the brain, if you believe that consciousness and all of that is just reducible to the brain, that's all that it is, it's just neurons firing, then there is no agent, so to speak, when it comes to mental activity. There are just events, neurons firing. For a materialist, I don't know if you're a materialist, Craig. I could, you're not. So, are you like a dualist, or what's your theory of mind? In other words, maybe that's too big of a question. I'm not
Well,
asking you
that's
to
a very
defend it,
good
just to
question,
know
and
what it
I'd
is.
like to start there because I have some things that I may be clarifying if I
Sure,
start with.
but just to note then, if you are a materialist, if you think that the brain just consists of neurons firing and the mind is reducible to the brain, then all events, including mental events, are, as I say, events. They're just things that happen. And things that happen either happen with causes or they don't. And if they happen without causes, you're not in control because there's no cause and it's random. And if they happen with causes, then the question is, are you in control of those causes? And the answer ultimately is always going to be no.
Yeah, so that's a good place for me to come in and sort of address some of the points that you've made. Um, I'm not a materialist, and I think if you understand what materialism and my position are, you would not be a materialist either. So I'll spell that out a little bit. Materialism is the idea that there is only material, there's only matter, there's only physical objects in this universe. But it's a contradiction in its own description. It's the idea that there's only matter. Ideas are not matter. That's why I can transfer them in in this way, and we can transfer them all over the world through, air and whatnot. And it's not like the idea is skipping over there. A sound is, but it's not the idea. Ideas are not material. We are both physical and conscious beings. We have matter and we have mind. We have a body and the psychology. We have matter and spirit. But when I speak of spirit, when people objectivist persuasion speak of spirit, we don't mean something mysterious. We mean consciousness. Existence exists, we know that. Physical existence, the external world exists, we know that because we can perceive it. Our perceptions are real, just like a bat's perceptions are real. You don't see a bat flying toward a cliff and then moving and go, well, his sonar isn't real. The cliff's not really there. Of course, the cliff is there, and his sonar works. That's why he turned and didn't hit the cliff. And we're the same way. We have different sensory apparatuses, but they work. And what we see is real. They deliver real material. The world exists. We also are conscious, and we know that because we're using our consciousness right now. We are aware. All consciousness is simply an axiomatic fact about human existence and the existence of certain other conscious creatures, that awareness is real. So existence exists, external reality exists, and consciousness exists, and we happen to be a bit of both. We are a body, which is a physical existent, and we have a mind, which is a non-physical existent. And that mind, in our case, not in the case of all conscious animals, but in our case, operates with a faculty called reason that operates by choice. And that's what that's how this fits into the question of mechanist. And this brings me to the next point, which is very related. So Alex is still, I think, working on. I think because I assume you're a determinist. I mean a materialist. Excuse me. I meant to say materialist.
I'm agnostic about
Okay.
everything.
So if materialism were true, then true wouldn't be a thing because true is a concept. So that wouldn't even exist. Materialism can't be true. It's just the most self-refuting idea in the world. Um, Mechanistic causation is another package deal that we have going on here. I want to bring this in. A lot of materialists think that the only kind of causation there can be is mechanical causation because that's the only stuff that's out there is mechanics. They're just physical stuff being what it is and bumping into each other and causing things to happen like billiard balls. But mechanical things are not the only things that exist. Consciousness does exist. And so if we're going to have a theory of causation that is supposed to be a universal theory, remember the law of causality is supposed to be a universal law. It's supposed to be about everything that is, right? You cannot freeze out of the equation consciousness and the way that consciousness actually acts. Your law of causality has to include, as a universal law, everything in the universe. It has to be put forth in a way, conceptualized in a way that captures the actual nature of everything you're trying to capture. So you can't say that causation is mechanical things bumping into each other. That's mechanistic causation, but there's also volitional causation, conscious causation. There's even vegetative causation, which is not identical to regular mechanistic causation. There are certain chemical causations that are not the same as rocks rolling down hills. So causation, properly conceived, has to capture all of these things. And the law of causality that I'm putting forth, which is not unique to me, H.W.B. Joseph writes about this very clearly. Brand Blanchard held this view of causation. I think Aristotle held this view of causation, at least in his better formulations. And it's simply that actions are actions of entities. An entity, whatever it is, acts in accordance with its identity. My mind is a thing. It's an entity. It's a mental entity, but it's an entity. And it acts in a certain way. And that way is by choosing to activate reason or not to do so. There's nothing against the law of causation here. It's an instance of causation. Next item here. Alex said earlier that he thought that I held that we don't control our desires, and that's not precise. You certainly don't control your desires in the immediate moment. You have no control over what you feel right now. If a terrorist ran in here and started, shooting guns at us all, you would be terrified and you would have no say over that. But what we do have control of, setting aside sort of emergency situations like that, what we do have control of is the development of our emotions over time, because emotions are simply automatic reactions to our value judgments in relation to the experiences we have in life. And the experiences we have in life, we can either activate our mind in thinking about them or not activate our mind. And if we do activate our mind, then our values are going to form in one way. For instance, if you activate your mind regularly, you're going to realize that theft is wrong because when people produce things, they own that thing by virtue of the law of causation. They produced it, ergo it belongs to them. The John Locke view of the principle of property rights. And that's a pretty natural way of thinking about things. You understand this in the sandbox to some extent when kid tries to steal your truck. So if you choose to activate your mind, your value will be, hey, property rights are a thing. I'm going to respect property rights. If you don't think about things that way, if you refuse to activate your mind, you might become a criminal. I'll take stuff because I can get away with it. And that's exactly what happens. So we do control our values ultimately, not directly and immediately, but ultimately we do. And we can change them over time by correcting our thinking and correcting our value judgments, and therefore changing the way that we feel about things. That's important because I'm arguing here for a harmony of all of these things that I think is real. And it's true that emotions exist and they can be in conflict with your reasoning. But if you reason well over time, you can get all of this stuff to harmonize. And that's important. If you make the choice to reason, you can do that. How is it then, according to Alex, that reason forces us to conclude things as soon as we see that they're true? Well, in a sense, he's got a point there. When you see that something makes sense, it's like, oh, yeah, all these points add up. I'm going to have to accept that conclusion. There is a sense in which reason pushes you to accept that conclusion. That's a beautiful thing that it does that. But guess what you also get to do? Because you have free will. And you couldn't do this if you didn't have free will. You get to evade. You can pretend that something isn't true when you've seen that it is. This is one of the things that free will enables us to do. You can push facts away from your consciousness, out of your mind, and evade such that you can get away with robbing the bank, even though you can get yourself to take those actions, even though you know that property's not yours, and this is the wrong thing to do on some level. So it's just not true that reason forces us to accept all of its conclusions. It is true that when the evidence adds up and you activate your mind to take into account all of the available and relevant evidence, it does get to a point at a certain stage where it's like, oh, this is true. And you would have to evade not to accept that truth. That's true. But the evasion is actually, the capacity to evade is actually proof of the existence of free will. It's not proof in the sense of me making an argument. It's proof in the direct evidence. It's a self-evidently true that you can evade. You can observe that you can evade. So free will doesn't need to be proven because the observation of free will is stronger than proof. Proof is second best. Proof takes a back seat to direct observation. You can introspectively see that you choose to regulate your degree of awareness. You can see it. And because of that, you don't need to prove it. The whole point of a proof is to reduce an abstract idea, a complex abstract idea, down to perceptual observation. When you start with something at perceptual observation, it doesn't need to be proven. I don't have to, if I walk across the stage, I don't go, you can't then say, well, I saw you do it, but prove it. It's perceptually self-evident that I walked across the stage. The same thing is true of free will. So people can compartmentalize too. You can push things. You can say, I'm not going to accept this here. And religious people do this all the time. They compartmentalize. I know that if God's will is the moral law and I have to do whatever God said, that sounds good to me. But what about if God tells you to kill your son like he did with Abraham? And they go, oh, well, I'll push that one out of my head. What about God said kill homosexuals? Are you going to go do that? No, I'll push that one out of my head. Evasion and compartmentalization is a capacity that we have because we have free will. That's why we can do these things. And it's why we need to use free will correctly. And the last thing I'll say, and I'm trying to hit on the various things, points that you brought up. If we didn't have free will, there would be no such thing. And this isn't an argument for free will. It's just a point that these things couldn't exist without it. And therefore it shows that they depend on it. Integrity wouldn't be a thing. You couldn't have integrity if you didn't have you couldn't be loyal to your values if you didn't have the option of being disloyal to your values. You have to be able to choose to act against your values in order to have integrity or lack of integrity. It just couldn't exist. It wouldn't make any sense to regret things. Why do we sometimes regret things? We go, God damn it, I should have made this choice there. I knew it. I saw it. I went to the rave. I was thinking about the rave a little bit, and then I was thinking about the business plan. I went to the rave. Woke up the next day, it's like, God damn it, I don't have the plan that I really needed. I went out of focus and I treated, therefore, because I was out of focus, I treated a lower value as if it was a higher value. You can do that. But you can only do it because you have the capacity to activate or not activate your mind. So.
We've got about 3 minutes here. Yeah, you can choose to push those facts out of your mind, which will affect your conclusion if you want to. Something makes you take into consideration those facts or not. Something makes you go, I'm pretty sure if I sort of consider that fact over there, it might push me in that direction. I don't want to do that. That's what makes you push it away. It's just exactly the same problem over and over again. As I don't think Craig is comprehensively incorporating the concept of a second order desire. Right, like the idea that you can change your desires, and Craig says, well, of course you can't do so on a sort of crude level, on a surface level, right? I want to have a cigarette. I can't choose to just not want to have a cigarette, but I could choose to change my desire, right? I could choose to over time abstain and learn about the health effects and stuff, and in that way I can sort of control that desire in the long term. Yeah, if you want to. If you're convinced by some higher order desire that you don't want to smoke, then yeah, you might want to talk yourself out of it in that regard. Craig also struggled to conceptualize regret in the context where there's no free will. He says, I went to the rave, but man, I should have gone to the... What is that experience like? It's like you do something and then afterwards you think, "Oh man, I didn't think of that. If only I'd have thought of that, I wouldn't have done that thing, you know? I went outside today and I regret that I didn't take an umbrella because I forgot it was going to rain. I really regret not taking an umbrella. I think, gosh, if only it had just occurred to me that it was going to rain, then I would have taken an umbrella." That is the feeling of regret. The feeling of regret is realizing that you were essentially compelled to do something which you now realize on the basis of new information you didn't want to do in the first place. That I think is the nature of regret. But I really want to drill down on, like, we haven't even defined free will here. Like for me, free will is the ability to have acted differently in the past. Like if I rewound the clock, then I could have gone to the shop and purchased some different color shoes because these are the only ones that I had packed with me. I could have, gone back far enough in time and bought black shoes instead of white shoes, for example. That I had the free decision to make that. I don't know if, Craig, you agree with that as a sort of idea of what people care about when they're talking about free will, the ability to have acted differently. But the question that I want to consider, and I actually would like to ask this directly to you, Craig, is like, there are two worlds, right? Two possible worlds, two circumstances. Each of these universes are exactly the same in every respect. The wind is blowing in the same direction at the same speed. Every atom is moving in exactly the same direction with the same velocity. However, in one of those universes, this morning, Craig decides to put on brown shoes. And in another of those universes, Craig decides to put on black shoes. My question is, what is the difference between those two universes? And if there were no difference in any of the physical qualities of those universes, I mean, every single atom in your brain is firing in the same direction at the same speed, and yet somehow you could have done something differently. I want to know how that's possible.
Really good question, and this is a good place to end with and then we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A. This is where I really want to stress the point I made earlier, which is that your choice in your free will choice is not about content. It's not about brown shoes or black shoes.
But the ability to have chosen to like wear black shoes.
It's not even about that because that's content also. It's the choice to do this thing that's content. The choice is method. It's to activate your mind and therefore take into account everything. That's it. That's the free will that you have. And you do get to choose in a secondary way things like whether you're going to put on black shoes or brown shoes. The difference here is simply this. If you do not choose to focus your mind when selecting your shoes for the day, you might fail to remember or to take into account the full context, and therefore you might fail to realize, oh, I need these dressier shoes for the lunch this afternoon because it's more formal. So you're going to do whatever you want to do at the moment with these two shoes, but what you want to do will be different depending on whether you activate your mind and take into account the full context of your values or not. If you don't, it could go either way. If you do, it's going to go the way that's better, which is you'll remember to do that. So it's really important, and this goes to the choosing to quit smoking thing too. Even there, the choice to quit smoking, there's a content element and there's a method element. And you have to separate these. If you don't separate these, you'll get confused. This is why Ayn Rand's concept of a package deal fallacy is really important in so many philosophic discussions. Because if you're putting things together that don't belong together, that need to be separated for clarity, you got to do that. When you choose to quit smoking, which I did in my 20s, what is going on? Well, that you have a desire, you want to quit smoking. That's certainly there. We don't need to pretend that desires aren't a part of this. Desire is a hugely important aspect of human life. There's this thing I do, smoking, that's content. And then there's whether or not I'm going to activate my mind and think and be fully aware. Fully aware of what? Anything that I need to be fully aware of for this thing, all the available and relevant information. This is what your capacity to use free will enables you to do, is to activate your mind fully or less than fully or almost all the way off. It's very hard to get it all the way off, but worse than turning it all the way off, unless you're asleep, obviously, if you're asleep, but I'm talking about your waking moments. The very worst thing you can do is evade. And I'll use the smoking example just to really pin this one down. If you know that smoking is really, really bad for you, yet you feel like smoking, you have this desire to smoke. The desire to smoke can be very strong. And if you never focus and activate your mind and think about the full context of what you're doing when you're smoking, you likely will never quit smoking. The people who do quit smoking overcome that desire precisely because they choose to think about the bigger, broader picture, precisely because they activate their rational faculty by an act of choice. And that's what saves them from continuing this destructive activity.
Isn't it
We
just because
all
they develop a
use,
stronger desire to be healthy?
pardon?
Isn't it just because they develop a stronger desire
This,
to be healthy?
yes, but the reason they saw that desire as stronger is because they chose to broaden and take the full context of their life into
So
picture.
the only
When the people
choice,
who don't do that don't, it's because they're just like, but I want the cigarette. Like
yeah.
they're pushing away out of their mind. This is an instance of evasion. They're literally evading what they know to be true.
So the only choice is to sort of turn on this focus, but what that focus then leads you to do, what conclusion that reason leads you to,
Much of that
is
is driven by
completely out of your control.
not completely out of your control, but it's very, so here's the thing. This capacity to choose to activate your mind for awareness is so small and narrow in a certain respect, but it's also huge in another respect because it's such a powerful switch that you get to throw. It's not about content, it's simply about, will I be fully aware? And then if you are fully aware, sure, your values and your desires are all in play when you're making choices. I'm not going to go, I hate watching football. I'm not all of a sudden someday because I activate my mind, go, oh, I'll go watch football. The things that come into my mind are, maybe I'll go ballroom dancing or rock
Yeah.
climbing. The things that are my values are the things that come into mind. But I'm only going to act on those in the best way if I activate my mind. If I don't, I'm still going to act on my values and desires. There's no question about that. This is where I really agree with you, that we do always act on our strongest
Well,
desire.
like, do you think you could have worn dark trousers instead of light trousers today?
I could have, and it's funny that you ask that because I actually contemplated between the two this morning.
Mhm.
So I'll tell you how that went, and I'll try to be brief on this. So I thought, well, I wore darker trousers yesterday,
Mhm.
and I thought, well, I'm going to be wearing a lighter shirt today. Lighter trousers will be nice. It's also a daytime event, and I thought, I'd like to wear lighter trousers.
You'd like to.
I'd like to. Yeah, no, my desires were absolutely involved. Look, desires are never, your choices are never divorced from desire.
Mm.
Don't get me wrong. And it's important to understand this. I'm not saying that free will gets you to divorce your choices from your desires. Free will is simply one very narrow thing you get to do and be fully aware. Then your desires do a ton of work in your decision making.
So that kind of gets you nowhere then. Like you make this decision to start focusing, to turn on your rational faculty, but then everything that it then does is still just governed by your desires.
But it doesn't get you nowhere. It gets you to remember to wear the better shoes on the day that you should wear the better shoes. The pant thing didn't matter that much, right? But the shoes could in that instance, right? So if you're not focusing, you're just going to act on the immediate strongest desire. If you do focus, you're going to take into account all of the available and relevant facts, and you're still going to act on the stronger desire, but the desire that's stronger may be very different
Mm.
because you took all the facts into account.
And your choice to focus is not determined by some factor. There's no factor.
It's not.
which
It's caused. This is the thing. This is why I really want to break apart determined and necessitated and caused, because it is caused. It's caused by you. It's caused by you, a being who has a rational faculty that by its nature operates by choice. And it's sui generis. This is why analogies don't really work for volition, because there's nothing else like it. I understand that in quantum mechanics, there's some stuff going on at the subatomic level that's really interesting, where there are things happening where you can't determine whether a photon is going to move this way or that way, and it seems to be random. There may be other instances in nature that are akin to what we experience in free will. Maybe we'll discover more of them. But for right now, free will is just this one thing that operates very differently than other things. But we shouldn't discount that it exists just because it's strange or because it's unusual. we can observe it in the way the way that I'm painting it. I think everyone can observe it, and I'm just saying, trust your, it's like, don't trust your lion eyes, right? If I see a speeding truck coming, it's really coming, and if I see myself walk across the stage or choosing Paris as the city, I really saw it. Free will's the same way. If you see yourself being able to ramp up or ramp down your awareness, it's real.
We're over time for questions, so I think we should probably move.
Yeah,
It
thanks.
does sound a bit like, I speak to theists sometimes, like presuppositionalists, and they'll say that like your sort of apprehension of God is pre-rational and the proof comes second. It kind of reminds me of that, you know, the Lewisian from all my proofs of thy divinity.
The difference
Skip
there, I
side.
think, is that they're arbitrarily asserting things that must exist in order for, they're saying God must exist in order for the law of identity to hold, right? And that's just the primacy of consciousness. They're just going, well, something has to, a conscious mind has to make A be A. A couldn't just be itself without a consciousness making it that. That's arbitrary. And you can't see God. You can see yourself introspectively. You can see yourself making this choice. So I don't think it's the same as the preset.
That's a whirlwind. But shall we?
Fair enough.
Questions. Hello. Thank you. Hello there.
Okay. When you were talking about reason, it seemed like you were talking about a cut and dry mechanical process of deductive reasoning. But following up on what Craig was saying, as reason as a method is more than just deduction, just introspecting. I see it's a rather messy, difficult process involving lots of choices. Like, I want something. How can I get something? Will this do it? Maybe. Well, what kind of a thing is it? Is that important? Isn't it? I'm having a hard time figuring this out. I might give up on doing this. Am I going to keep looking and trying to find this out? Or am I going to give up now? Well, maybe I'll stick with it because I really want it, but I'm not getting anywhere. Should I try another approach?
Hey,
Shouldn't I?
do bring it to a question because you have a very long.
No, I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying. Why?
Okay, so
why not?
It's not as you're talking about it. It's a process involving many choices.
Quite. So I give deductive reasoning as an example because it's the most straightforward. Like you say, it's like premise, conclusion, right? The kind of reasoning you're talking about is a lot more complicated, but I think it does work in the same way. For example, you sort of imagined this scenario where you're like, well, maybe I want to do this, but maybe there's this, but then is that important? Is that not important? That shouldn't be a trouble because why not at every single one of those stages just make a choice? Is that important? Yeah, sure. Okay, it's important. And now it's important. And then, well, I want this, but I want this and I'm not sure. Well, just choose. Well, I just choose to want that one more, just to make it easier for yourself. Every time you have to do a complex series of reasoning and you're sort of being thrown around all over the place, just at every junction, just arbitrarily, just choose one, just make a choice. It's up to you, right? Except it's not, because the reason why that's so difficult is because it's as if you're being sort of blown in different directions by the wind of reason, like you kind of, there's this consideration and this crops up and then you read this in a book and you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And it's pushing you all over the place. And it's almost like you don't just get to decide, right? Like whether any instance in that chain of reasoning convinces you or not. So deductive arguments are one kind of argument, right? And it's very obvious to me that you don't choose that if P then Q, P, therefore Q. You definitely don't get to choose that conclusion follows from the premises. But even in these more complicated examples, even in these like 300 premise long syllogisms, or I suppose that wouldn't be a syllogism, but 300 premise long arguments that people give, it's going to be much more complicated and there's going to be much more room for this kind of deliberation. But that process is still the same. Information is presented to you and you find out whether you're convinced by it or not. And it's not a matter of choice. It's a matter of finding out, in other words, in my humble opinion.
Thomas.
Alex, when you were arguing against sense perception as a source of evidence, you used the example of being in the car and your momentum tries to carry you one way and you
Yeah.
feel a force that isn't there. But the only reason we know that the force is actually centripetal towards the center of the circle is because we're then using more information from reality, more information we've got through our senses ultimately to build this understanding of how physics works. The same thing's true with the mirage. You find out what it actually is through more observation. In fact, the only reason we can know anything that we see is false is because we can see other things and derive from them. So is it not the case that all knowledge depends on sense perception, and sense perception has to be valid for any knowledge to be valid?
Oh yeah, so of course, like if we deny sense perception, like as a whole, we're going to be in a skeptical hellhole. We're going to be in trouble, right? All I'm trying to demonstrate with that example is that using our introspection about how we feel, that is, like, I really feel like I have free will. I also really feel like I can clap my hands. Versus these rational arguments. Well, Zeno says it's impossible to clap my hands. Well, Alex says it's impossible to have free will. What I'm saying is that, like, introspection alone isn't enough. That's not to say, like, we can't trust our sense data or we can't trust any of the experiences we have. Like, I feel like I'm sat in a chair right now and I believe that I am. What I'm saying is that if I were to make a philosophical argument for the existence of the external world or something, I'm not sure that would be quite enough. So I don't like, well, I do sort of doubt as much as the next man the accuracy of my sense data, but I didn't mean to imply that I don't think we can ever trust our instincts. What I mean to say is that if we have good philosophical reason to doubt them, then we should. In the same sense that, before we understood the physics of velocity, I think there'd be no rational reason to doubt that there's a force pulling you backwards. It would be kind of unreasonable to suggest that you weren't flying backwards until new information comes along and we realize actually what felt one way can be explained in other ways. And I think the same thing is true of free will. It's perfectly rational to think, yeah, it feels like we've got free will. But once you consider all of the relevant philosophical context, it becomes something that's open to doubt, if that makes sense. Sure, let's do that.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I would argue the essence of free will is the ability to focus, the choice to focus. So my question is how do you explain the fact that damage to specific regions of the brain
Can you
compares
speak
a
up?
person to, yeah, sure. How do you address the problem that certain kinds of brain damage impact negatively a person's ability to focus if you deny focus as the essence of free will? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I feel like that's a question in sort of the other direction. Like if you're this so-called free ability that you have, this sui generis ability that exists in the immaterial mind that's completely uh, conceptually divorced from like the physical matter, if that's the focal point of free will, then as you say, why is it that I could prod your physical brain in such a way as to either diminish that faculty or cause you to do differently? Like, I think it's perfectly reasonable for most people in this room, you may disagree with me, to think that if supposing that Craig is about to make a decision whether to focus his mind or not, that if I had the sufficient technological ability, I could take some medical instruments and I could prod his brain to make him focus or to make him not focus. I could make him do that just by prodding his brain. If free will is something that is in the control of an agent immaterially, separately from the material goings on in the brain, then quite right. I think you are to ask that question. Why would I be able to affect that decision by prodding something material? So I actually think that's an objection for the objectivist case rather than for my case, if that makes sense. But I may well be misunderstanding your question.
So let me say a word about it because I think, you know, uh, consciousness clearly seems to be very connected to the brain. And it goes both ways. We can think things that change brain states, and brain states can have an effect on how and whether we can think. But this shouldn't be a surprise. We see this in the rest of nature. If you disrupt a plant's photosynthesis processes, it's not going to photosynthesize. If a heart functions in a certain way, if you stick a knife in it, it starts functioning in a different way. And so the relationship of the brain and the mind is interesting, and I think a whole lot more needs to be done. More knowledge needs to be gained there before you can say much about it. We simply do know that if you have a normally functioning brain, you typically are, if not always are, capable of using your consciousness correctly. And if your brain gets damaged beyond a certain point, you can't. More discoveries will come out on all of this in time, I'm sure. But we know we're conscious because we are aware and we use consciousness. You can't use something if you don't have it. You can't. So um, that's all pretty clear. But I don't think that poses. I frankly don't think that poses problems for either of these arguments.
Well, it does if it's if you look at consciousness as an emergent property of the brain, just like an ant and an ant colony are two different things. At the ant colony needs the ant in order to exist. I would argue that consciousness is much the same. Where do you stand? Because you didn't bring up emergent properties in your spiel. Where do you stand?
Oh yeah, so I'm
for example?
it's the your theory of consciousness seems really relevant to this question. I actually think that the arguments I make against free will are completely ambivalent about your theory of consciousness. Just as a point of interest, for me, I'm deeply suspicious of materialism for I suppose similar reasons for to Craig. I find it very difficult to imagine that the redness that I see when I close my eyes is somehow just the same thing as atoms bumping into each other in the brain. That seems extremely improbable to me. But the point I would make is that a lot of people make an anti-free will case based on like scientific ideas like determinism and that famous Lebet experiment where he sort of tries to prove that people choose to press a button after their awareness or the other way around or whatever. All of that is kind of a dead end to me. I think there are philosophical reasons to think that the concept of free will as the ability to have acted differently in the past, had everything been the same otherwise, is philosophically incoherent. And so it doesn't matter what your theory of mind is. I'm attracted to some kind of emergent theory of mind, though, a bit like the sponginess of a cake, to borrow John Cottingham's wonderful example. The sponginess of a cake. There's no sponginess in any of the ingredients of a cake or any of the atoms that make it up. And yet, sponginess persists. And I think consciousness may function in a similar way. And so may time, by the way, as a property of the universe. That's quite a fun one, too. But a conversation for another time, perhaps.
Hi, thank you for your discussion. I have a question for Alex. Do you believe in an infinite regress of causation, both from a human perspective and entities in general? And if you don't, do you believe it ends up with God?
Yeah, it's funny when you said that. I almost made that joke earlier when Craig said, "And what is the ultimate cause of all of this?" And the word was on my tongue. I think there are really good arguments for some kind of prime mover, unactualized actualizer, first cause based on cause and effect in the universe. I remain ambiguous for two reasons. Firstly, I think that, as I said, particularly these psychological phenomena that we're talking about, I have no problem saying that at some point they terminate in randomness. There may be, for example, as the quantum physicists will tell us, the Copenhagen interpretation tells us that probability is built into the foundation of the universe. I kind of think that's nonsense. As I like to say, you can't spell Copenhagen interpretation without cope. I think it's probably not true. But I'm happy to grant that it's possible. So there may be some termination in randomness, which means that would be where the chain terminates. There would not be an infinite regress of causation. It would terminate in randomness, which would mean you're not in control, but you don't have this problem of an infinite regress. If, however, that is wrong and the causes do have to sort of go back either forever or terminate in a first cause, then I have no problem with one of the two hypotheses. Either, yeah, there is a first causer who is probably sensible to call God. Sure, I think that's a good argument. It's stable, which is why I'm an agnostic rather than calling myself an atheist. But secondly, my friend Phil Halper just co-authored a book with Dr. It's Nayesh Afshordi. I always struggle to pronounce his name. The Battle of the Big Bang. A wonderful overview of all the current theories of what the Big Bang actually was. And there are all kinds of ideas in science which are emerging, which have absolutely no problem with an infinite past, infinite inflationary cosmology, big bounces, this kind of stuff, which leaves the scientific door open also to essentially what you would call an infinite regress. I think that's maybe less plausible, but it requires a lot more thought. But I have no problem saying, like, yeah, that's a good argument for the existence of God, sure.
Just quickly, so if it's randomness, is it like an Epicurean swerve, would you say? Or like what causes the randomness?
But that's
just random.
If anything causes a randomness, then it wouldn't be random, which is one of the reasons why I'm quite suspicious of the concept, right? When quantum physicists say, like, no, the particle is a wave of probability, this is a mathematical formulation. On two separate occasions, I've had people on my show refer to it as the so-called shut up and calculate approach, which is that originally quantum physicists discover these weird experimental data, like the double split experiment most famously, and they say, well, look, we've got this mathematical system which says if we just treat this sort of particle as a wave of probability, then all of our maths checks out and we can start building computers. And that's enough for them. But the philosopher or the realist about physics wants to know, but what's actually going on? And what I think began as a methodological approach, which is, well, as long as the maths works out and we can use it functionally, that's fine. That's what the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics does. But that can't be what's actually going on. So I agree with you. I'm like, no. I don't think, as Einstein said, God played dice with the universe. Although I can't remember who it is that, in response to him, the lesser known rebuttal, where another scientist said to him, Einstein, stop telling God what to do. I'm also sensitive to that hubris as well. So that's why I remain agnostic. I don't know, but I'm much more inclined to the first cause God thing than like infinite inflationary cosmology.
And randomness.
I think that sounds like
Yeah.
randomness. I'm somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
I have plenty to say on the subject of God and all of this, but I want to stay focused on free will. So let's move on to the next question.
Want is the opposite.
We'll talk about that some other time.
Okay. Oh my God. Sorry. Hello. Okay, thank you. You explain how our desires shape our decisions. So, but sometimes what happens when external pressures like a strict familyhood or the society filled with stereotypes and set of rules um, limit our choices. I mean, like when can we truly say that we are acting out of our free will when we deep down want to live differently, but also we want to be likable and accepted by the society?
So yeah, I'll answer briefly on that, and I'm sure Alex will have something to say too. Your choices and your desires, your emotions, coexist. They're there all the time. Each exists in the context of the other existing with it. And you also these things also coexist in the society you're in. If you're living in a society that treats women as second-class citizens or puts them in bags, as some Middle Eastern, Islamic countries do, then your choices are absolutely limited by what you can do there. If you're like, well, I want to go start a business selling scarves on the street corner, and the Taliban come along and go, you'll do no such thing or we'll kill you. You can't do that unless you're willing to die to do it, right? So all sorts of things can limit our choices. This is why the use of physical force against human beings is evil, because it stops them from being able to use their rational faculty to make their own decisions about how they want to live. And it stops them from being able to use free will. That's the thing it stops. So there's no question that you are very limited in certain ways. Remember, though, that your choices are not, your fundamental choice is not about content. It's about activating your mind versus not activating your mind. It's a choice to think or not to think is a simple way to put it, but that makes it sound like it's binary and there are two extremes in it. But it's binary in one sense, because you're either going to think with the full context of your knowledge, that's one thing. And then there are degrees of evasion or drift. There is an absolute. There's when you turn your mind on fully to be fully aware. And that's the state that you want to exist in as much as possible, because that enables you to pull all the data in that you need to make the best decisions you can within the context you're in. You can't make decisions that defy your context. That just can't happen, but you can make decisions within your context. And you can always, unless you're literally strapped to a tree or in a concentration camp or something like that, you can always choose, hey, I'm going to activate my mind. Even in a concentration camp, to some extent, you can activate your mind. How the hell could I try to kill the guards and get out of here, right? You can activate your mind to try to be fully aware and then make some decisions with that awareness. So that's the thing. Don't confuse content and method in thinking about free will. It's not content. It's a methodological choice.
Thank you so much.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hey.
Alex, I've been a fan of you for the last 8 years, but my question is for Craig. So,
Well, thanks anyway.
Craig, I am a medical student. We still do not know a lot about all the intricacies of how the brain and the mind work exactly in detail. But we've known for centuries that the brain is like the hardware and the mind is like the software. And the hardware can exist without the software, like that brain can exist without the mind, but not the other way around. So there can be no mind without a hardware. There can be no mind without the brain. So the mind can't exactly be an entity apart from the brain. So my question is, how is materialism wrong exactly? Isn't the brain made of atoms like everything else? How are our thoughts and decisions not just a product of the chemical and electrical reactions that make up our brain activity?
Yeah, a great question. So you've got a premise in there that I think you need to check, and that is the idea that if the if consciousness can't exist without a brain, but the brain can exist without consciousness, therefore they're the same thing. Is that what
Yeah, I'm saying that basically your mind and your thoughts are the chemical reactions that occur in your brain.
Yeah. So that's the premise that I think you need to check. Let's broaden it and take it away from consciousness and think about life versus non-life. Okay. So we know this is one of the things that Ayn Rand pointed out that helped her discover why life is the standard of moral value. She observed that there's a fundamental alternative in the universe, and that is existence or non-existence. And that alternative is faced really only by one kind of thing, and that is by living things. When a living thing dies, its chemical elements remain, its physical elements remain, and then decompose. A flower might die and then decompose or whatever, but the material, or at least the energy, remains. What goes out of existence is life, and it literally goes out of existence. Now, we wouldn't say by observing that the body and life are the same thing. There's something different. And as Ayn Rand famously put it, a body without a soul is a corpse, and a soul without a body is a ghost. These are not things. So a corpse can be a thing, but a ghost isn't. So your consciousness can go out of existence, but that fact does not mean, and consciousness, as far as we know, is very intricately tied in with your brain, but they're different things. They're different things, and one of them operates by conscious choice and the use of your free will, and the other one is just a phenomenally intricate piece of meat, in effect.
Isn't saying that our consciousness and our brain activity are different things the same thing as saying that music and sound waves are different things? Aren't they?
The music and sound waves are different things. Music does not, if a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? Well, no, not unless there's an ear there for the sound waves, the vibrations to hit. The sound happens by way of the eardrum and the brain functioning. The sound doesn't exist out there. The waves exist out there, but the sound doesn't. Same with music. That's how music works. So the music does not exist other than insofar as a human mind, or maybe animals can hear music too. So yeah, don't get confused about there's a whole lot to say about the form object distinction. There's what things are, and then there's the form in which we perceive them, and then what happens. I mean, red doesn't even exist out there. Red is, the color red exists only insofar as light waves hit a certain kind of retina, and then the brain processes it in a certain way. So these are different things.
Yeah, but the wavelength, I'm sorry, exists up there. So
Yes,
even if the
the
perception
wavelengths
varies.
do.
Yeah.
Wavelengths do, but color doesn't. The sound waves do, but sound doesn't.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good.
All human action is a result of choices, whether we're reasoning, critical thinking, and non-critical thinking. There is our desires are based on the choices we make, and our fears are based. So if we act according to force, it's because we're afraid of the force. If we act according to whim, it's because we're too lazy to do the thinking. So when you said earlier about the tree limb, about the leaf falling and there was no cause, it made me wonder, well, there has to be a cause. There's a cause for everything.
Yeah.
So I consulted Google AI,
Mhm.
and I found out there's a process called abstention, which causes a cell wall to be created to conserve resources, and that's what weakens the bond and lets the leaf fall. So in that process, what I did was induction. I think induction maybe is a stronger proof of free will than even evasion, and I wondered what your thoughts are on that.
Well, since you're asking me the proof side of it, I don't think free will can be proven because I think it's stronger than proof. It's literally self-evident, which is what proofs come down to. So there's no proving free will. There's just understanding what we mean by the term, because if you don't understand what we mean, you can't see it. As soon as you understand it, you're like, oh, I can regulate whether my degree of awareness. That's all it is. It's just that simple. But until you understand it, you can't see that you have it. If you think it's this other thing, I can make any choice I want anytime. The 2 + 2 = 4. Where's the free will in that? As I think Dostoevsky put it. Um, that you can't will 2 + 2 not to equal 4. That's not what it is. But when you understand what free will actually is, it's just this very narrow thing that is extremely powerful. Then you can see directly that you have it. I also would just challenge real quickly the first premise you started with there, which is that all human actions are driven by free will. That's not true.
By choices.
That's true by choices, but
all our values are based on our choices.
all of our chosen actions, yeah. But we have you could take actions that are not. If somebody came in here right now and started shooting guns, we would all hit the floor, and it would not be a chosen action. Also, your heart is beating. There are actions going on. There's all sorts of actions going on in human beings that are not driven by free will. They're even conscious. There are things going on in your brain all the time that you're not in control of. We are in control of a very narrow but very important and very high leverage thing, and that is the activation of our conscious mind or not. That's it.
That's why I like to say conscious action, because I agree with you that
Conscious actions.
it's important. Like, I always specify all conscious action, because of course all unconscious action you're trivially not in control of. So when I'm talking about free will, I'm interested in those conscious actions we perform. And I say that you either do something because you're forced to, or because you either do anything because you're forced to or because you choose to, but you only ever technically do conscious actions because you choose to. And the reason that I don't often say that is because it gets a bit complicated because of what you've said, which is like, well, if somebody comes up to me and says, give me your wallet or I'll shoot you, I could choose to be shot, like I get, like, in a way, like, it's because I want not to be shot that I decide to give over the wallet, right? But like, the easiest way in common parlance to cash that out is to say, well, I was forced to give him my wallet. But if we've got our philosophical caps on, it's like, no, technically it was a choice. So I like to be very clear and say that all conscious action.
And some people do choose
down
to be
choice.
shot in those
exactly.
instances, right?
So I agree with you, in other words, that when you say, even in those situations which feel like force, the question asked earlier, and I was going to say in response, but I didn't for time's sake, what about societal factors? What about the fact that, like, I want to do something, but there's, society is going to judge me, or I've got a strong family pressure. In a way, you could say, okay, I'll just put up with that. But that would be horrible. And your desire to avoid that is strong enough that you don't do it. So it still is ultimately governed by desires. In other words, I agree with what you were saying at the beginning there, perhaps more than Crave was.
Well, my disagreement with it is just in recognizing that there are things that our bodies do that don't involve choice. On the gun to the head issue and the acting out of fear, Alex is right. You could choose to go ahead and get shot. I think if you activate your free will and realize, hey, let me weigh these values correctly here, you're going to make the better choice, which is, here's my wallet, have fun, please go away.
If you more strongly desire.
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
say.
Yeah, but you're only going to more strongly desire the machismo that it would require to be like, I'm not giving you my wallet, you'll have to wrestle with me. Like, that's a really stupid decision, unless the guy really wants to die. If he wants to die, that's fine. But if he doesn't want to die, it's really a good idea to use your free will correctly so that you can weigh these two desires. Look like a tough guy, live to die another day. I'd rather, if you use free will, you're going to make the better decision there. So, thank you.